Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of FLOYD STREET'S FINEST. I am your host, Jeff Greer. As you know, we are part of the Field of 68 Media Network. Make sure you check out all of the wonderful Field of 68 podcasts. They've got the nightly recap show, all sorts of good stuff on the Field of 68 Media Network. And of course, the Field of 12 is getting ready for the college football playoff and all of that jazz. So make sure you're following across all your different platforms. Check out the podcasts. My personal favorite is, of course, the three-man weave crew. I think they're the best of the best. But let's get to today's episode. Let's not waste any time. If you're watching this, you can tell that my buddy Mike Rutherford is here with me today. We've got an absolutely horrible basketball game to talk about. So let's just dive in, Mike. You put out a tweet yesterday of the 7 stages or 8 stages of a Louisville basketball fan convincing yourselves that you can win this team that you're playing, Kentucky. Every year recently, it just seems like not really sure what to make of them. And last year, obviously, they rounded into incredible form and then stumbled in the NCAA tournament. This year's team really tough to read. And yet this matchup, like the spread should still be probably 25 points, right?
Yeah, I think that Stages of Grief tweet is actually from like 5 years ago because there's only one stage for Louisville this year, which is like the game's happening. Oh no, like
desolation.
That's it. Which is the really disappointing thing in all of this is, I mean, this feels like one of the more beatable John Calipari Kentucky teams since he arrived in 2009. You watch them, we're recording this on Thursday, you watch them last night against Missouri. They don't look good. They don't look particularly interested in playing for Kentucky basketball, which is saying something considering what we've seen as Louisville fans in recent weeks. But there's still like no hope amongst U of L fans. I mean, you still kind of have this deal where it's like, I mean, if you watched last night, Kentucky goes to Missouri, they get hammered. They get beaten down pretty badly. Louisville's chance of winning the game on Saturday, according to Ken Pom and the ESPN index, goes from 1.5% to 2.2% because of that. It's still not a great shot. It's still going to be a 20-plus point spread. And I think most Louisville fans are still, not overly optimistic that they can cover that spread, let alone have any shot of winning the game. It's just, I've never, and I feel like I've been saying this a lot over the last 2 months as far as like having first in my life as a Louisville fan, I've never had a Louisville Kentucky game with a buildup like this, where even in most years, there have been bad Louisville teams in my lifetime that have played good Kentucky teams. And even in those years, you have this weird mix of excitement, anticipation, kind of fear, just hatred, like all these different emotions swirling in the days leading up to the game. And this year, there's just none of that. I mean, I've got friends who are like, I'm probably not going to watch. I've got friends who are like, I mean, it's going to be bad, but we've made plans that, right after the game to try to forget about it. Like, there's no Louisville fan who thinks there's a legitimate shot at winning this game. And even if you do, it's more just like funny than it is. It doesn't change the overall direction of your season. You're still 3-11 with, one win of any sort of note. It'd be great for Kenny Payne. It would be great for the fan base to be able to unite for something for the first time in a long time, but it really wouldn't change anything dramatically as far as this season is concerned. And the likelihood of that happening seems extremely low. It's weird. I mean, I know Kentucky fans are mad, but Louisville fans are just kind of in the acceptance stage at this point.
Yeah, it's I have watched my fair amount of nature documentaries over the years. I anyone who knows me, this will not surprise you. I mean, I root for whoever is being chased. I root for them like so hard. And when the zebra gets caught or the antelope gets caught and you watch them just kind of give up and know that they're about to die, it like sticks with me for days. I mean, it bothers me for days and still lingers with me now that I'm talking about it. I'm thinking about a few scenes that I'll never forget. That kind of feels like Louisville basketball this year. Like it's just kind of like feels like everyone's just in shock and there's really no other. It's just the assumption that no matter what you do, it's going to be off the rails quickly and really no turning back every time they play. And the one time that didn't happen, it was because they made every shot they took. I mean, like Western Kentucky just ran into one night of the 13 games that Louisville has played, the one night where every shot is falling, and therefore, because the shots are falling, everybody plays super hard for Louisville. And they looked like some semblance of a team that could win, 10 games. And then they immediately followed that up against the worst team on their schedule and barely got past them because they played so poorly, and the effort was atrocious. My favorite thing looking at these games, Mike, is like, going on KenPom and some of these analytics sites and trying to do the like stat comparison and things like that. There's nothing on here. I'm looking right at the KenPom matchup page. There's literally nothing on here. If I'm being totally honest, nothing on here remotely that suggests that there is anywhere on the floor that Louisville has an advantage in this game. Nowhere. I mean, it's just a lot of red versus a lot of green. It's not good. That's not the matchup page you want to have before a rivalry game.
I mean, when I look at Louisville's KenPom page now, and I said this on the Tyson Tate podcast too, like I didn't, like you just said, I knew there was red, I knew there was green. Like we're purple in some areas. I'm like, did we break the system? Like the assist percentage is like we're 361st, and it's like a dark shade of purple. I'm like, I didn't know that color existed in this website. I'm not used to seeing it. So it's just it is remarkable. And like all the charts and the graphs that come out that track, like the most recent one I think was the one that charted assist rate compared to like offensive efficiency and among Power 6 conference teams. And they had to extend both axes to include Louisville. It's unbelievable. Like, I was not great at math growing up. I did not do well in geometry. I did not do well in any of these classes, but I can kind of like, it reminds me of like looking at the test grades that I would get and I'd be like, well, this doesn't look good. like I can't understand exactly what I did wrong, but this looks terrible. We're all out here by ourselves. The only team remotely close to us is California, who I know is not very good either. So this seems like a bad thing. It's just like I feel like I keep and being somebody who has to talk about this every day on the radio. Like you do find yourself just in this cycle of repeating, but we've never seen anything like this before. I mean, you and I were doing podcasts at the end of last season, a season where Louisville won 13 games, but had all this drama, starting the season without their head coach, bringing the head coach back in, finding out very quickly that it seemed like the head coach was not meshing with his players and certainly didn't want to be here, parting ways with the coach in the middle of the season, having this kind of lame duck end. And I think every Louisville fan, myself included, was like, let's never go through anything like this ever again. This is as bad as it gets. It certainly can never be worse. I think this is the worst Louisville team of my lifetime. And I mean, that notion just gets eviscerated in the first 2 months of this season. You can say what you will about, having hope for the future under Kenny Payne, having hope for the future under if you bring another head coach in a couple of years or whatever. But for right now, this present moment, it has never been this bad in any of our lifetimes. I mean, the metrics are you talking about KenPom. Louisville's 256. They had never finished. They had never finished below, I think, like 68th before last season, and that includes like multiple NIT teams. Because the KenPom era, I think, goes back to Rick Pitino's first season, which was 01-02. And now you're talking about, you're scrolling down and you're seeing Louisville like behind 2-10 teams from the Southland. Like McNeese State is above, and then the net, it's even worse. They're like 343rd. It's just beyond anything that any Louisville fan could have ever imagined. And I remember you and I did a podcast this summer when you were starting to put together your ACC preview stuff. And we were kind of like, brace yourself, Louisville fans. Like when these previews start coming out, it's going to look different than it has in any other year. You're going to see a lot of people predicting that you're going to finish 10th, 11th, 12th, maybe even slightly lower in the ACC. And I mean, I got a lot of responses from people who were like, you're being overly pessimistic. You're being a hater. And even those worst fears weren't anything in the realm of this, which is being arguably the worst ACC team in history. We're talking like including the, Kevin Stallings teams at Pitt, the Boston College team with the kid after the season who was like my favorite memory was going to get
Dennis
food.
Clifford.
Like in the metrics, Louisville is worse than those teams right now. It's just unbelievable how bad this thing has been. And if there were signs that it was going to get markedly better, that would be one thing. Those signs aren't there right now. Now, granted, they did just have, I think we can say safely, trying to be a little bit positive, their best loss of the season in their most recent game, which was still a 12-point loss to a whatever NC State team. But they covered the spread in the loss for the first time. So maybe they are showing some signs of improvement. They did fight if they got down, but it's been beyond anything I could have ever feared or expected for this season so far.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny that you went there, because I was just thinking, like, when you just look at the rankings, you see a 4-9 Southern, 4-9 Northern Arizona, 3-9 Texas Southern. These teams are all rated ahead of Louisville.
It's
I mean,
unreal.
it's just shocking. It's just shocking. The thing that I know you're probably running into the same challenges between doing the podcast and doing your show, and writing a lot, obviously, too. And I'm having very much, I would imagine, the same struggle is, I feel like I'm having the same conversation and the same thought I'm just like, it's not going to get better. There's no reason to think that it's going to get better. The recruiting is not good enough. And I keep looking at this schedule thinking, like, okay, great. So Louisville, say they lose to Kentucky, and it's not as bad as everyone expects, that they lose by 15 or something like that. You look at the rest of the schedule, if they beat Boston College and they beat, I'm just throwing this out, but, like, say they beat Boston College and they beat Georgia Tech, and maybe they steal the game against Florida State at home, which there's no reason to think they can do that. But that gives you 5 wins. That doesn't change anything. Like that,
No.
that you're still, at the end of the year, you lose in the opening game of the ACC tournament, you're still 5-27 at Louisville. And I feel like I'm just, like, in this waking up every day Groundhog Day level, just like, no matter, like, unless they shock us and go on a shocking turn of events to win 10 games, anything less than that, you're just like, that's the worst modern Louisville basketball team that you can think of. And I can't imagine a worse start to a tenure for a coach. Do you think there's any emotion for Kenny Payne going into a game against a guy who, is his coaching mentor? He's not Denny Crum, obviously, wasn't his college coach, but is his coaching mentor. I would imagine there's some emotion there, especially going on the road to play it. But you think there's maybe a level of, like, I hate to say this, like, embarrassment? Like, I don't know. What's your evaluation of that?
It's kind of hard. It's still been hard to get inside of Kenny Payne's mind. I mean, we still hear so little from him compared to, I guess, what we're used to. I mean, people have noted he has not done the radio show 2 of the last 3 weeks. Danny Manning was in his place this week. His post-game press conferences all seem to be sort of the same message, just phrased slightly differently after games. So it's hard. I mean, he hasn't really talked that much about Kentucky. I think we'll hear from him, I guess, in the next 48 before the game. We'll hear him talk, but he hasn't really said that much about his emotions going into this game. I think going back to real quickly what you were talking about before, and kind of having to talk about the same thing with Kenny Payne, having to talk about the same things and just finding a different way to do it. I feel like we're stuck in this cyclical deal as fans that has been going on since the summer. One of the best newsletters that I think you did, I'll toot your horn here, was the one this summer when you wrote about kind of, please don't do that. Now I already regret. I already regret doing this. But you wrote about kind of the trust in KP mentality this summer, when Louisville the roster was not taking shape the way that I think a lot of U of L fans hoped it would when Payne was hired in March. And, they weren't getting guards. LLS was the only guard. And everybody just kind of said, you just got to trust in KP. He's got a plan. He knows what he's doing. You fast forward 6 months later, and the people who I think are still saying Kenny Payne's the guy, he was the right hire, he's going to get Louisville basketball back to where it is, that's still kind of all they have to hold on to, is this trust in KP. Like, he's going to get it figured out. He's got a plan, because there's nothing tangible for any Louisville fan to grab onto right now. You certainly can't point to wins and losses. The worst start of any of our lifetimes, the worst team, it looks like, in any of our lifetimes. This is a program, and if you listen to the radio show, I sound like a broken record. This is the 110th season of Louisville basketball. They've been doing this for a long time. They've lost 20 games exactly once. And it was the 98 season, ironically, the year that they beat UK when UK went on to win the national title. And they lost exactly 20 games. So this is, unless something dramatic changes, this is going to be the team that loses more games than any other in the history of Louisville basketball. And if you're looking for something to say, like, that's okay, he's going to get it, you can't point to recruiting right now. He didn't have it really a chance to get anybody from 2022, and 2023 has not gone well. Let's just say it. He's got, I think Curtis Williams and Caleb Glenn can both be fine college players, but they're not the type of one and done difference makers, lottery picks that you were expecting when you got Kenny Payne. And with 2024, it's not going great. It sounds like Elliot Cadeau commits to North Carolina on Wednesday. A lot of the other kids that have Louisville on their lists from 2024, if you talk to recruiting folks, they say Louisville's the leader for none of them. So like you can't really point to that. The transfer portal, a lot of swinging and missing happened over the summer. That's really your only route to relevance next season now, is to kill in the portal this spring and summer. And what faith do you have in KP's ability to do that when we saw what happened last year? I guess you can say the NCAA stuff. I think that's a little bit of a cover-all excuse that doesn't fly, but if you want to say that, I guess you can say that. But the point is, like, Louisville, every Louisville fan wants Kenny Payne to succeed. I think that's a narrative that's out there that's fake, that people are rooting against Kenny. Nobody's rooting.
Lots of true fans.
No, nobody's rooting against the head coach at the University of Louisville. Everybody wants this to work. I think people are just fearful that it's not going to work and that we're going to waste too much time finding that out. But everybody wants him to be successful. What they want right now is something to point to and say, this is why he's going to be successful. Because the end goal at Louisville isn't just to, like, hey, maybe he's good enough to get into the NCAA tournament 2 years from now and be an 8 seed and lose in the first round or whatever. This is, I feel like I've said this a million times and I'm screaming it. This is Louisville, for God's sake. Like, this is a program that 10 years ago was about to win a national title. This is a program that is used to being top 25 good every year and at least in the mix for Final Fours and national titles every year. And if the low is this low, what faith do we have that the bar, that like the peak can be what we're used to as Louisville basketball fans? And I think that's the scary thing about right now, is that if you can't make this team at least more relevant than it is, and we're not saying, you know, I'm not even saying they have to be NCAA tournament good this year, but just like in the same realm of last year good, if you can't make that happen, then what faith should we have that when this 5-star talent or big time transfer talent hopefully does come 2 years from now, 3 years from now, whenever, that you can take that and mold it into a team that is capable of winning 6 games in the NCAA tournament? Because it just, there's no evidence to point to. There's no hope to point to. There's nothing to hold on to. And I think that's why you're seeing such an extreme reaction from a large contingent of Louisville fans. But as far as this weekend and the Calipari Payne relationship, I mean, you're seeing, it's weird. I looked at a lot of UK fan reaction last night and it was like, we'd love to have Kenny Payne back. And I think a lot of Louisville fans are like, we'd love for you to have Kenny Payne back. It's just like it's weird because, you know, maybe you would think in a normal situation, there'd be talk of John Calipari taking it easy on Kenny Payne. But the Louisville game has been Calipari's ace in the hole. Like, this is how he gets the fans back on his side every December when they start to lose a little bit of faith. And they've never been more on edge than they are right now. Like, there's an overwhelming sentiment that the best days of Calipari and Lexington are behind them, and the writing's been on the wall for a long time, and now we're just fully realizing it. And the best way for Calipari to start the process of reversing that mentality is to do what he's been doing consistently for the last decade and a half, which is hammering his hated rival. And especially in a year like this, where they've never been lower than they are, if he doesn't win that game by at least 20, it's going to be it's not going to play well for him. And even winning by 20 isn't going to, like, make anybody happy this year, but it can at least start that process. So I fully expect him to go, you know, full pedal down on Louisville if he can on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, no, I there's no question about it. If that's available to Kentucky, I think they will relish in the way that they did in the 17-18 season, that David Padgett was just kind of thrown in there. And Padgett's team to that point was 10-2. They hadn't really beaten anybody. They beat Indiana that year earlier that season, but they hadn't really beaten anybody until January. But coming into that game, they were at least 10-2 and playing hard. And all things considered, you would almost hope that season would be comparable just because of all of the stuff that happened leading up to that season. I realized it was much closer in, and Kentucky won that game by 30, so 29 to be exact. But yeah, I guess every week I'm thinking the same thing here, and I'm curious just to get everyone's opinion on this. But obviously, I really value yours. What do you do if you're Josh Hurd? Like, what do you think he's thinking right now as he's watching this play out?
It's the question that I get literally every day, whether it's somebody on the radio, like somebody stopping me walking the dog, like what needs to happen? How bad does it have to be for this to be the only year of Kenny Payne? And my answer has been pretty consistent. Like, I don't think there's an answer to that. I think that he's going to get a second year if he wants a second year. I think that it's far more likely. And I don't think either of these scenarios is likely. I think Kenny Payne will be your coach next year, but it's more likely that he would step away than it would be that he would get fired. Now, if it's, I mean, $10 million is a lot. And the fact that Louisville fans all know the buyout and how it works this early just goes to show like that it's not gotten off to a great start. I mean, every Louisville fan is like, well, it's $10 million. Then it goes down by $2 million every year after that. We should know that. Like, that should not be something that we all know right now. But $10 million is probably too pricey to buy him out after year one. Now, if he loses out and he goes 2-29 and you've got like, player revolts or people, saying that they don't know what's going on in practice, that's one thing. I don't think that that's going to happen. I think the season plays out, and I think your scenario is the most likely. They probably win like 3 games in the ACC. They have 5 or 6 wins when all said and done, and it's just a disastrous season. And the staff tries to overhaul the roster with transfers for next year, and then you see how that goes. But it's a terrible position for Josh Hurd to be in. Like, again, he has dealt with, the man hasn't had the job even on a full-time basis. He's had it for like 6 months, 7 months.
Yeah.
He's had it on an interim basis plus the full-time for just over a year. And in that span, he's dealt with 2 historically negative situations pertaining to the flagship program for his athletic institution. Getting rid of a parting ways with the head coach in the middle of the season had never happened before at Louisville. He had to navigate that when he had the job for just over a month. And now he's got the worst start in the modern era of Louisville basketball with his guy that he just hired himself. Like how do you deal with that? So it's all strange. It's all weird. Now, the one thing that I will say for Kenny Payne is that, last season, anybody who was covering this team, I know you can vouch for this, like the stories that were coming out of last year's team were not hard to find. Like, people were very willing to tell you how dysfunctional it was. Maybe we didn't know, like, while it was happening, just how bad it was, but you heard stories like players fighting after games, players getting into it with the coaches, all the guys who were sitting out for. You haven't heard really any of that this year. Like you've got, if the players are pissed off about what's happening, at least in regards to like having animosity towards the coaching staff, they're not expressing it on social media. They're not expressing it through back channels. They're not going to reporters and telling them like, hey man, this guy didn't know what he's doing. This sucks. Practice is terrible. You haven't heard stories of players getting into it after games. Like, he has held this thing together in that regard. Like there hasn't been total dysfunction. Now, maybe that can change in the months ahead. But for right now, like, it hasn't been a failure at that level. And if you're asking me, like, how does he not get a second year? I think that's the only way it happens. If like a total embarrassment on a number of different levels. But outside of that, I think he's back for next year.
Yeah, that I do. In my head, I'm thinking, well, there's still a lot of basketball left to play, a lot of potential damaging losses. But yeah, no, I agree, and that actually has been a relatively remarkable thing, because every kid who comes to Louisville assumes that they would be the opposite of 2-11, that they'd be 11-2, that they're a tournament team at minimum, and in their good years, they're a really good tournament team with a high seed, and in their middling years, they're maybe a bubble team. But I mean, I think a lot of people would say a couple of years ago, the Carleague Jones team is kind of like what you would think. At the time, you would have said, okay, I think that's probably about the floor for what Louisville basketball should be. And then obviously we saw what it looks like when that fell out a couple seasons later, or the next season, and everything just went to shit. But a lot of that had to do with off-court stuff. And I think the team that was assembled, I think the way that they were coached in retrospect was heavily impacted by off-court things, by off-court drama, by someone in Chris Mack who was, I think, really preoccupied with his job security and kind of checked out after the Dino Gaudio stuff of the summer and dealing with the president. And there's a lot of politics going on there. This just isn't the same scenario. This team is just bad. And you have a coach who keeps saying they need to play harder, and everyone else is sitting there watching, like, play harder to execute what strategy? Like what? And that's something that I think you mentioned this earlier. That's probably the thing that has bothered me the most. And I know we probably both feel just like every day it's the same conversation, but like the thing that has bothered me the most is if you keep coming in there and saying effort isn't good, we have to practice 3 hours instead of an hour and a half and all this stuff, and you keep getting the results that I'm looking at to my left here on this Ken Palm page, maybe it's the coaching that's the problem. Maybe it's the practice program that you've set up. Maybe it's the scouts that you're doing are not very good. Maybe it doesn't matter what the scout is. Maybe at that point they're so just out of their element that no matter what the scouting report even says, it doesn't matter if you execute it or not, because your team just is not capable of reaching that mark. But that's shocking. That's shocking. I can tell you right now. I mean, I just think of all of these coaches who have had very flawed rosters, who figure out ways to just be competitive if they're a good coach. I keep thinking to myself, like, if you threw this roster to like John Beeline or just coaches who we perceive to be kind of innovative, smart game planning type preparation coaches, I feel like we'd see like a 1-3-1. We'd see all sorts of just different things to get LLS off the ball, but still creating and scoring, and still being a playmaker at times. You'd find ways to use the 7 big guys out of your 10 scholarship players to find ways to be innovative there with high-low post stuff. I mean, all of these things that I think we all thought by having one of the best big guys, if not the best big guy in the history of college basketball, or certainly in the conversation, I would think, if you talk to anyone who's followed college basketball their whole lives, and Danny Manning on your bench, and then another guy who is a more versatile big guy who kind of, based on what I've read and heard about Kenny Payne as a player, would fit perfectly into the modern game as kind of a stretch forward type guy, or a big wing. You've got 2 guys who should be able to teach a team how to play with this odd number of big guys. Like it just doesn't add up to me that you have the people who you would think would be able to take this calculus and solve the equation, or even to a slightly better effect than what it is. And if I'm Josh Hurd, that's what I'm most concerned about. Is okay, go get 10 5-star kids, which is obviously not going to happen, but you go get 10 5-star kids. What have you seen in the actual basketball, like the strategy, the way they line up on defense, whatever it is they're doing on offense, which I don't think there are plays. I know they keep saying we're not running there's no plays. It doesn't look like there's plays. What makes you think that just having more talented kids is going to be any different?
I mean, the image that's gotten passed around like a meme too, which is it's doesn't tell the whole story, but it certainly speaks volumes. Is, the national title team that was 10 years ago, they started 1 5-star, 3 4-stars, and 1 3-star. This year's team is starting 1 5-star, 3 4-stars, and 1 3-star. Like you can, it's a talent issue, and certainly the talent isn't where it should be, respective to Louisville basketball's history. It's good enough to be much, much better than this team is right now. And I think the most frustrating thing for Louisville fans is you look around the country and you see teams that were in similar situations going into the season that are having success. I mean, Missouri has a complete roster overhaul and they play hard as hell, and they've lost 1 game so far this season. And then the NCAA cloud stuff. A lot of fans will say, the IARP. That's why you can get kids from the transfer portal. You know who got kids from the transfer portal? Every other team that was under the cloud of the IARP that could not go to transfers and say definitively, hey, we can guarantee that we're going to be eligible for the 2023 NCAA tournament. Kenny Payne could not say that to kids. The other coaches couldn't say that to kids either. I mean, you think Matt McMahon at LSU could say that to kids? No, he brings a bunch of kids from Murray State, gets a couple of other transfers. They've lost one game. They beat Arkansas, who hammered Louisville in the Maui Invitational. They beat them last night. Memphis couldn't say that. They're off to a much better start than people were anticipating. They could be a top 25 team. Kansas, Arizona, NC State, all got kids from the transfer portal where Louisville was just swinging and missing. And going back to your first point, the lowest bar that this team needed to clear in year one under Kenny Payne, and the bar that I thought was not going to be an issue. The bar's on the ground. It should not be. All you have to do is step over it. Was just playing hard. Was seeing that level of effort and desire and intensity that we did not see for most of last season return to Cardinal basketball, and it has not happened. And I hate doing the thing where you compare Kenny Payne, who's in his first year as a head coach, to Rick Pitino, who's a Hall of Fame coach, maybe the best to ever do it, but let's be real. Like, we want Kenny Payne to get Louisville basketball back to where Pitino had it. So the comparison is fair. In Pitino's first season, he inherits a roster that had lost, they'd won 12 games the year before in Denny Crum. He takes all those same bad attitudes, all that same effort level issues, and he turns that into a team that damn near makes the NCAA tournament in his first season. They go to the NIT, they make a run in the NIT. Like, they played hard, and he gave a tangible piece of evidence to the fan base that when the talent level gets improved here, this system is going to work at a high level. I'm going to bring national titles home. And the team was fun to watch. At this time in that season, in Rick Pitino's, they'd lost one game. And
I'm looking at their schedule right now.
It was such a quick turnaround. They played so hard. They played so fast. And it was the same kids that we had seen go through the motions the year before and acted like they did not want to be playing basketball at Louisville at all. And to have that not happen in year one under Kenny Payne, that first step, which is just playing hard and showing that desire and showing that pride in being a Cardinal basketball player, that's been the biggest. Forget the win-loss record. Forget the records you're setting. The fact that the effort level hasn't been better is the biggest disappointment in these first 2 months.
Yeah. And I keep coming back to, how do you turn that around? That should be like the story here of this great comeback of a player who is beloved by the program, who has always kind of been on the radar for a lot of people, as like every school fan base has one, if not like 4 or 5 coaches who used to play at the school, or were maybe an assistant coach, but even that's stretching it, used to play at the school. And they would say, one day when there's an opening, I hope we look at this guy, and this guy, and they're all alumni. That's whatever they want, a guy from that school. And to have it be that exact situation, and have him be able to, and to his credit, I like the rhetoric. I like a lot of what he says about the community. I think a lot of people do. And I think it's really valuable to have someone who understands some of the, I had a fan tell me the other day, use the word healing, and just kind of like trying to soothe over a lot of the frustrations that have come up over the last 6-7 years, just in general with the entire university and the program. There's a lot of feeling like there's parts of the Louisville basketball community that have been neglected. I know all of that. I know anyone listening to this knows all of that context. And he's dealt with that really well. Like, to his credit, I think the rhetoric there has been great. And he's talked a lot about it. He's showed up at places. He's taken photos. He's spoken to groups. He's done all of those things. And I thought that paired with the, like, you should care about this because of all these people who care about you, I thought that message would resonate with a team, no matter who's on the team, to the point where they, like you said, if nothing else, they are fighting their asses off. I mean, you look at this Louisville schedule from 01-02, and they lost an early game to Oregon by 27, but they surprised Ohio State. They beat Tennessee. They lost a couple of games. They got blown out. They got blown out by Cincinnati. They got blown out by Indiana. They lost by 15 to Indiana, but they won a bunch of games. They beat Cincinnati in the return game. Like, you can just see it just in the results here, even the close losses. That's what I think it just like would resonate with people. Yeah. Tom Crean, look at I talked about this with Jack Grossman. Look at the first year that Tom Crean took over Indiana. They were like 7-25 or some horrible record. But I remember watching them, and the people who were calling the game were always talking about how hard the players were playing, even though they knew that they were, fighting an uphill battle and losing a lot. They kept playing hard. And it's just stunning to me that we've reached this point in the season where you're just like, how is that not a key thing? Well, Mike, I mentioned this to you before we hit record. I am too cheap to pay for the full Zoom. I'm never going to do it. I'm never going to do it. You and I both know we could probably talk for 2 hours about this stuff. Final 3 minutes here. Just your parting thoughts, I guess, as we close out the year, coming to another rivalry game. What's your message, I guess, for Cards fans who value your voice as things are clearly not going very well right now?
I don't know if there's a message you can send that's going to make anybody feel better. I guess my message is, like, let's try to not just be at each other's throats over this thing for a long time. Like, everybody wants the same thing. I think the reason why you see so many extreme opinions about Kenny Payne is because every Louisville fan is so hurt by what's transpired over the last 7 years, and everybody is so desperate for this thing that has meant so much to us for most people their entire lives to get back to feeling like it has for most of our lives, and to get back to being fun. And some people see the route to that happening as being patient with Kenny Payne. Some people see the route to that happening as, you got to get rid of this guy as soon as possible because he clearly doesn't have it. Like, that's where this all stems from. Everybody wants the same things. Everybody wants us to be back. It's just nobody's ever been in this situation before. That we're all handling this situation for the first time. When people say I'm not going to watch the games, I can't relate to that. If they're 2-30, I'm watching game 33. Like, that's the way I am. I'm wired that way.
Glutton for punishment.
I don't judge people who have the other. Like, everybody's going to handle this differently. Let's all just try to recognize that we're on the same page. That's my big message, because I don't see it getting markedly better here in the new year.
Well, it doesn't really, it's not a fair comparison because obviously the history and tradition of Louisville basketball being what it has been for so long, but very recently, just a couple of years ago, having a 2 seed and a team that people were picking to go to the Final Four, and obviously didn't get there, but you go back 7, 8, 9 years to teams that were winning championships and competed for Final Fours. So it's not a fair comparison. I would just tell you that if you're a Louisville fan, you do not want to get to the malaise point of the program. And I speak from experience as a Pitt guy, where it went completely to malaise, and that is not a place that anyone wants to be. I don't think Louisville's close to that by any stretch. The reaction to their season suggests completely that is not the case. But yes, you're all on the same page, and remember that so that you can keep that energy going, because the malaise side of things, trust me, you don't want to be there. Well, Mike, thank you so much. I know we're both juggling armies of children and colds and all sorts of crap that we're having to deal with, but thank you as always for your time, and let's do this again in the new year.
Thanks, buddy.